Hi guys, so in this video I'm going to be talking about upgrading the CPU in a laptop. I recently picked up an older Sony Vaio on eBay and I wanted to upgrade the CPU from a 1.8 GHz Core 2 Duo to a faster one, and I found that there wasn't much information available on the internet about upgrading laptop CPUs. So I thought I'd just make a video showing you first of all how to decide if your laptop is upgradable, and also a little bit about the upgrade itself. So in this example I'm looking at the Asus X502CA laptop on Amazon, and this has an Intel Celeron 1007U processor. So I'm going to go onto the Intel website and have a look at the specs for the 1007U. And I'm going to scroll down now and have a look for the type of socket that this processor uses. And next to socket supported there, you can see that it says FCBGA 1023. Now the important part there is BGA because that stands for ball grid array, and that basically means that the processor is soldered onto the motherboard. So unfortunately this laptop isn't upgradable. You can't replace that 1007U processor with a faster one. So now I'm looking at this Acer TravelMate, which has a Celeron 1005M CPU. And again, I'm going to go onto the Intel website and find out what type of socket this processor uses. And next to socket supported there, it has FCPGA 988, which means that this processor is in a socket and it can be removed. Now there's also the question as to whether the motherboard BIOS will accept a different processor. So I'm going to check the stats for this model laptop. It's an Acer P253E. So on the Acer website, I'm just going to have a look at the spec sheet for the P253 series. You can see that it uses the i5, i3, Pentium and Celeron processors. Most of the time laptop manufacturers will use the same motherboard and BIOS for different machines in the same range, so there's a good chance that an i5 or i3 would work in that machine. I'm just going to check now the TDP, which is the thermal design power, and it's a 35 watt processor that is in the laptop at the moment. So ideally when upgrading we'd be looking for another processor that is a 35 watt processor. So I've gone to the cpuworld.com website here and I'm looking at the processors which fit in the PGA 988 socket. And you can see the TDP there on the right, and there is the 1005M, which is 35 watts. As you can see, we wouldn't be able to use any of these Core i7 quad processors because they are all 55 watts and there's a good chance that they would run too hot in the laptop. We could use one of these dual core i7s. They are 35 watts. Or we could use one of these i5s, such as this i5 3380 or the 3340. And looking at the specs for the 3340M, you can see that it comes with Intel HD 4000 integrated graphics, which would be a big improvement over the stock HD graphics on the Celeron 1005M, in addition to the faster processor. So I'm going to check on prices for the i5 3340M on eBay, and as you can see they run between about $130 up to $200. And you're probably looking at a speed increase of about 3 times upgrading to that processor. If you didn't want to spend as much, you could also go for an i3 processor, such as the 3120M, which also has the HD 4000 integrated graphics. And check on eBay for the price of the i3 3120M, and you can see that they're about $60. And to see what sort of speed increase you would get, we can check the Geekbench 2 speeds here on the Geekbench browser, and a 3120M seems to get between 6,000 and 7,000 Geekbench score. And comparing that to the 1005M Celeron that's in the laptop at the moment, that gets about 3,300. So you can see that just the $60 CPU upgrade would almost double the speed of the laptop, from 3,300 to around 6,000 or 7,000 for just $58. And another example here is the Acer Aspire V3 571G with a Core i3 3110 CPU. Again, I'm going to check on which type of socket this processor uses on the Intel website. And as you can see, that CPU supports both sockets, the BGA and the PGA, so we have no way of knowing whether that is a soldered processor or it's a socketed processor. So the easiest way to find out without actually opening a laptop is just to search for a motherboard for that laptop on eBay, and I found one here, and you can see that on the motherboard is an actual socket, so it should be replaceable and upgradable. Again, the 3110M Core i3 is a 35 watt processor, so ideally you'd be looking at upgrading to another 35 watt processor such as one of the Core i5s. You might be able to get away with a 45 watt quad core i7 such as the 2630QM, but you might need extra cooling in the laptop because it will generate more heat. As for the upgrade itself, I'm not going to go through the whole process because obviously it's different for every laptop. But this is the Sony Vaio that I picked up on eBay, and I was able to find a teardown guide on iFixit.com. So I would recommend checking iFixit or another website or YouTube for a teardown of your particular laptop so that you have a guide to follow when you're taking it apart. Once you have access to the motherboard, you should be able to see the CPU socket there. In my case, I have a heat pipe connected to a heatsink on the CPU, and the heat pipe goes to the fan and also goes to the heatsink on the GPU. So to access the processor, I'm going to have to remove all of the screws connecting the heatsink to the CPU and the fan assembly and the heatsink on the GPU. And with those screws removed, I'm able to lift off the heatsink assembly. And you can see the thermal paste there, which will need to be replaced before we put the new CPU in. This is the existing CPU. As you can see, it's the T7100 Core 2 Duo at 1.8 GHz. In this case, the motherboard is using the MPGA 478MN socket, or the socket M, which is different to the G2 sockets used by the second or third generation core processors, but the principle is the same. You just use a flathead screwdriver to turn the lock to the open position. Lift out the old processor, being careful not to touch the pins on the bottom, just hold it by the edge. Then you can drop in the new processor, apply new heatsink compound into the die, replace the heatsink assembly and turn the lock back to the locked position. And then it's just a case of putting the rest of the laptop back together again. So I upgraded the CPU in this laptop from a 1.8 GHz T7100 to a 2 GHz T7300 Core 2 Duo, and it's been running absolutely fine for weeks since I did the upgrade. I've had no problems whatsoever, and it does feel a bit faster. Obviously you'd see a much bigger speed increase if you went from something like a Celeron to a Core i3 or a Core i5. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.